Hello everybody, welcome to Soapbox Slam, where I get on my soapbox and I talk about the things that I see going on. There will be some intermittent slams that I do, but this is part 2 of a long, possibly 10-part series where I discuss the profits of corporations and companies in the United States of America and identify how inflation has been in a complete ruse and a price gouge and a money grab for corporations. And it has happened across every sector of American industries. And this is part 2 of that series. I previously posted on the automobile industry. I do implore you, these are a little bit lengthy. I am trying to condense and consolidate and do less rambling. But I do want to identify that these are very well worth listening to and challenging your thoughts and challenging you to do the research and investigate what I'm telling you so that you don't take what I'm saying as face value or believe that I've even made any of this up. These are facts, just straight facts. I'm logical enough. I understand I'm just a dumb nigga, but I am logical enough to read and put 2 and 2 together. I can follow numbers. I am capable of all that. And I am sharing this information with you all so that you can formulate a real argument and hold politicians to task and really challenge the system that we are currently in. And that's what I'm on my soapbox about. This is part 2, and part 2 addresses the food industry. Now, in part 1, I did the automobile industry. I showed you the profits that the automobile industry has made for the last 10 to 15 years. I showed you all of the the 3 American automobile industries, and I showed you the foreign automobile industries, the Japanese and Korean automobile industries. And as I did that post, and I really encourage you to watch the whole, it is lengthy, but watch the entire post because I talk about a lot and I identify how the profits that have been made since coming out of the pandemic are egregious. In addition to that, in that post, I identify what the CEOs, and in this post, I will identify what the CEOs of these food companies are making. But in the previous post, I identified what the CEOs of the car companies make. I identified what their senior management makes, and I identified the hourly waged person and what they make. I also, in that post, and will do in this post, identify what the hourly wage makes, what that makes per year. And then I also tally what the average expense, including rental expense, is in the United States of America, what the average bare minimum for that is, and why I argue and I have the argument and position that I do have, and that post, this post, and future posts. So that's what I'm on my soapbox about. This is part 2, and part 2 addresses the food industry. And when I say the food industry, I looked at the profits, the net profits, net income. That means revenue minus expenses. And the difference of that is your net profit. You don't have to, that's pure profit, okay? Not just all the money that they made, but what was deducted in expenses and what was left over after deduction in expenses and everything else, what the company took in for the year as pure profits. And I reported that for the automobile industry, and I identified with that report how it has been a complete money grab. And now I'm doing it for the food industry, and I've done it for not just the automobile and the food industry. I did it for the streaming service industry. I did it for the telephone industry. I did it for the electronic industry. I did it for the banking industry. I did it for the airline industry. I did it for the grocery store, the national grocery store chain industry. I've done it for tons of, I have examined and written down and researched over 50 of the American corporations and their net profits prior to pandemic, during pandemic, and after pandemic. And the results that I have discovered and all of this research and everything else. Like I said, look at the automobile. This is the food industry. The results are staggering when you realize how much profit they truly have made when they blamed it on supply chain supply and inflation, as if it was needed because of the cost of gasoline, or if it was needed because of the cost of production and all that other stuff. And what I'm debunking and what I'm trying to reveal to you all and get you guys to challenge, review, and hold representatives and corporations to task is that this was a complete and utter money grab. The American society has been pillaged, stolen from, and raped and lied to about it, so that more people can get rich, people can get richer, and corporations can get richer. Now, this may sound like that's a hyperbole ad hominem statement, but the reason why I'm trying to back that statement up with facts is show you exactly what the numbers are and the reality of the situation, and prove to you that it's not just one industry. It's across the board, and it has been across the board, which is why I examined over 50 different corporations and what their profits were for the last 10 years, divided by sectors and industries. Last post was the the automobile industry. Today, I'm doing the food industry. The food companies that I examined, and the ones I'm talking about today: General Mills, Post, Kellogg, the cereal, Coca-Cola, Tyson Chicken, Oscar Mayer Heinz, Butterball. Those are the ones that I'm talking about today. Okay. And the trend that you will see, like it was exactly the same in the automobile industry, the trend you will see is that after the pandemic, they doubled their profits. During the pandemic, they had the exact same profits that they had before the pandemic started. And that the pandemic truly never, they never lost money during the pandemic, even through the shutdown and everything else. That the supply chains that they blamed, every automobile, everything across the entire American society that they blamed as supply chain and supply was all a ruse. It was an assertive effort to force inflation so that people could get rich, and so that government, for all the money that it's borrowed, could get money back by raising the prices of goods and commodities, so that they could tax a higher price base to get more revenue to pay for all the money that they've borrowed to try and cut back on the debt. That is what all this is really about. And your representatives signed off on this, your representatives co-signed for this, and your representatives have continued to do this for the last 50 to 60 years. And we are suffering, especially working class people like you and I. And that's what I'm on my soapbox about. I am trying to show you the numbers so that you don't just take my ranting and discussions as just uninformed hyperbole ad hominem. So these are the industries I examined. Okay. Now I want to talk about, this soapbox is about the food industry and how it's trending the exact same as the auto industry. Okay. And my solution, what the problems are and my solutions to these problems, I'm going to talk about first. And then after I talk about that, I'm going to talk about what a Republican approach to our society has been and what the Democratic approach to our society has been, and why I'm of the position that we should not be Republicans or Democrats, especially if you're an intellectual mind, that you should be an independent and require both the Republicans and the Democrats to pander for your vote. Because currently the Republicans and the Democrats pander to corporation, which is why this has happened in the first place. They are pandering to everybody else, corporation and everybody else. They are in the pockets. They are taking payouts by all of the corporations and everything else and all these other foreign countries, and they're not loyal to us, their constituents. Now, the Democrats have a great claim and the Republicans have a great claim. I plan to always and continue to debunk both until I die, or until I start to see in the metrics more and more people moving away from one party or the other and move as independents, looking for and requiring that all representatives pander for their vote and make laws and enact laws that are advantageous for working class people, as opposed to the other way around. A bottom up government where the government serves the people, as opposed to a top down government where the government mandates to the people what's going to be. Like I said, I will talk about my position. I will talk about the Republican and Democratic parties and what they've been doing to facilitate this egregious money grab and price gouging and the destructive legislation and behavior and assertive effort to enable it. That's the most thing. I mean, it's almost criminal because it is not to be on the end of complete conspiracy here, but it is being co-signed for by the Republicans and or the Democrats to enable this to happen so that there was a money grab and that this is the way it would be. And I'll explain the advantages to that when I talk about the political parties. What I want to start out with, like I did with the automobile industry, I want to come out with just some basic numbers and tuck these basic numbers and these basic concepts in your mind. Now, having said that, if you are mid-level to senior level management, none of this is applicable to you, and inflation and all of these higher prices really aren't affecting you because you're above $150,000 a year and you are able to be comfortable and fine. And that's your perspective and how you operate. That's those people, the working class people's problem, right? Because you're better and superior because you make more money and it doesn't affect you. And that's truly how you behave and that's how you act and that's your perspective. And the point I make about that to you all is you can ignore what I'm telling you and the realities of these numbers and the realities and the truth, facts, the straight facts of these numbers. You can ignore that and pretend that you're a part of the wealthy class. But remember, once the working class is gone, you're the next group that are now the poor, and they will eliminate you. There, by the grace of God, you have your position, and your sin is no greater than my sin. These kind of phrases and this kind of concept, just remember that you might be above $150,000, but might not be $500,000. And so none of this applies to you. So you can ignore the realities of this situation and pretend that you are a part of the Elon Musk groups, but you're not. And once people like me in the working class and the minorities and things, once we're out of the picture, you're the next group to go. Remember that. You will be the next group to go. Don't think that you are buddy-buddy with them. I guarantee you, you are not. They have no desire to be a part of, to be among you. You are bourgeoisie, 100%. And I would change that perspective and listen to these, because this is the facts. You don't have to agree with everything I'm saying, but things I am saying are true, and you can be 100% upper middle class person who makes $150,000 a year, and none of this can really apply to you, and all this inflation stuff and everything else is just a little mosquito for your wonderful, beautiful lives. But these are real numbers, these are realities, and your judgment will come. And once we're gone, the judgment will be upon you, and you will endure what we are enduring now. Just remember that. Make your own decision. But the facts and the numbers are real. One thing I'm going to start this out before I go into, again, this post is about the food industry. Okay. Last night and tonight, and on the news reporting and even in articles that I've read in the last 2 days, they're talking about inflation now. They're saying that inflation no longer exists. And what they're really talking about is the inflation rate. That means the cost of commodities, goods, and services across the board. Inflation is just one specific thing. Goods and commodities across the board is the prices of everything going up, and that's an inflation rate when everything goes up. When an individual sector is affected by something, that's inflation, period. So there are two terms that have been used interchangeably and misleading. And when they have been recently talking about inflation rate not going, they're talking about the inflation rate. All commodities, goods, and services no longer raising the prices of goods and services and commodities. But inflation would be, for an example, the price of gasoline going up because of a hurricane or tornado. For example, in the last month of August and half of July, since we had those horrible storms, one of our refineries was taken out, and it was taken out for more than 3 weeks. And that refinery had to make their updates and everything else. And so the price of gasoline from that storm jumped 45 cents in Illinois. 45 cents. It literally went from $1.45 to $1.89. Okay. So that's an example of inflation. an inflation price in gas, one industry affected because of something external factor or internal factor that changed the price of that particular good, service, or commodity. Another example would be Tyson Foods has had to destroy half of their flock of chickens because of bird flu, a pandemic that is a silent pandemic that is destroying a lot in American society. We're not paying a lot of attention to it, but it has caused Tyson to destroy their product. And so they're not profitable. So the price of chicken, eggs, and everything else have been fluctuating dramatically because of this battle with bird flu and Tyson's and the and the chicken food companies having to destroy their product. Okay, so when an example like that happens, that is an inflation in just the chicken prices. Just because chicken prices goes up doesn't mean beef, cow, ham, pork, fish, all the other industries go up just because that happened to chicken. However, in a very seedy kind of conspiracy way, a lot of those other companies, when something like that does happen, it does put more pressure on the demand for other foods. Since that's not in demand, it can't be in demand, and so they do have to raise their prices a little bit to compensate for the fact of that option is no longer there. But for the most part, inflation just affects one individual sector of an economy. An inflation rate is every sector, that being homeowners insurance, car insurance, gasoline, food, banking, everything goes up. That's inflation rate. And what they've been talking about in the news, not being high anymore and there's no longer inflation, they're manipulating and misleading you because they're talking about inflation rate. They're not talking about inflation, that being of one individual sector. And so I want to make that point very clear. But in saying that, I've been watching on the news and reading in articles now, they're reporting that there's no more inflation, that inflation is at 0.2%, not 2%, but 0.2, you know, 2/100th or 2/10 of a percentage of inflation growth, which, you know, signals the Fed to lower interest rates and everything else because inflation is where it needs to be and da-da-da. But what that does not mean is that the price of goods and services have gone down. And in fact, quite contrary, or quite the opposite, the prices of goods and services are continuing to go up. It's just now not happening across the board. It's infiltrating different sectors at different times, you know, the summertime, wintertime, each of these different sectors are raising the right prices individually at different times. So it does not mean that, so the inflation rate does not happen or increase because it's not everything all at once simultaneously at the same time, which is what happened during the pandemic and right after the pandemic. And the reason why I'm doing these posts is I'm proving to you all and challenging you all to look at the numbers the way I have and justifying. I know I'm a dumb nigger, so maybe these brilliant minds that are on the television can explain how the numbers don't match the story that they're telling. Because the truth of the matter is the numbers don't lie. And anyways, we'll get into all that. They're reporting that that's up. They're also reporting now, today, they started reporting how the food industry has been price gouging and everything else. Well, I've been doing this now for my research and all these companies I've examined, or 50 companies and everything else, dividing them in sectors, formulating this discussion, thinking about it, reading about it, and everything else. I've been doing this for more than 2 months, and they're just now starting to talk about it, and it's ironic that it came on today, the day that I chose to do this post and post it. I started the post with the automobile industry. I'm doing the food industry. All the reporting in the news is the food industry and how it's a price gouge and what, quote unquote, Kamala Harris plans to do about it and everything else. Well, there's the problem with that is a ruse because they were in on it. They enabled this and they co-signed for this. And I'll explain all that why in a minute, but that's the truth. And I'm sorry to paint such a sinister picture of our elected representatives. But the point I'm making about that is because we don't hold our representatives, Republican and Democrats, to task, because we vote based on culture war and party politics, they don't owe us, the voters, their constituency, anything. All they owe now is the corporation, because we don't have to hold them to task, and the corporations give them the most money to enable the laws and practices that they want. That's truth. I'm sorry that you might not like to hear that, but that's truth. So now they're starting to report about how what Kamala Harris is going to do about the price gouging and the money grab that the food industry has done and everything else. Well, you know what, you're late to the party and you were a part of the whole and now you're turncoating on that so you can try and punish them and bring people to your side as if you are championing the people. And I argue there's no way in hell you've been championing the people, that rather you knew this was going to happen. That's also a part of the reason why when you heard in Biden's economic address, he said it was always going to be a soft landing. We always knew this was going to be a soft landing. I knew this was going to happen. The only way you would know that this is going to happen is that you had to be meeting with these corporate boards and telling them, okay, I'll let you get away with a money grab and everything else, but it's going to stop, and it's going to stop by the end of my term, and da-da-da. And that's how they're going to, I mean, that's the soft landing. That's how he's so sure it was going to be a soft landing, because he knew from the very beginning that all of the pricing that has occurred across the board, automobile, food, which we'll examine today, all across the board has all been a money grab. And it was never set by true free market values or capitalism. It was artificially set by banks, corporations, and our elected representatives. And I'll tell you the reason why in a minute. So, you know, Wolf Blitzer reported about this. In fact, in one article that I read in the USA Today talking about inflation, they actually stated in this that corporations right now are in a very difficult position. The reason why corporations right now are in a very difficult position is because because the inflation rate was so high, almost 10% across the board. Inflation rate, not inflation, meaning every industry across the board, your utility bills, your gas, your electric, your gasoline, transportation gasoline, the automobile costs, food costs, everything across the board went up. And that also went up for corporations. So their production cost had to go up. It cost them more to run the electricity to produce less product. It cost them more all across the board as well, just like it cost us the same. That they had to endure too. Well, they want to pass the cost of all of that on to us again now. That's what they want to do now. And in the very article, they're very upset, but they're also afraid because they have to eat the cost of the higher production costs, because they've already passed on the max that the consumer is able to handle. They've already passed that on. They've maxed that out for us people. They've already maxed that out. And so if they tried to raise the prices again, the American society would practically revolt and reject it. That's literally what the article said in the USA Today. Literally what the article said. So corporations are starting now to regret the fact that now they're going to have to eat the higher operation costs, and that they also need now the inflation rate, not just to go down, but they need prices to go down across the board. They need the inflation rate to actually be negative at this point, because they can't pass the cost on to the consumer. And that's what they normally do and want to do when these types of things go up, whether they have to pay higher wages or whether an inflation occurs on a certain sector. Let's say more lumber is more expensive because a bunch of wood trees got burned down in Canada and the United States. And so now lumber is more expensive. And so now anybody that's building with wood has to pay higher costs for wood or whatever else. So now they have to eat the operation cost. All companies across the board are now having to eat operation costs because they maxed out right after the pandemic and through the pandemic by price gouging. They maxed out what the consumer can pay. And now they want to pass that cost back on to the consumer, but the consumer can't afford the new cost because we afford the cost that they've already artificially set right out of the pandemic. That's the conundrum. That's what the article talked about in USA Today. And this is very real. This is absolutely very real. And the biggest part about all that is the fact that they think that they are entitled to pass that cost on back to the consumer. That's your cost to do fucking business. Period. But they want to pass everything back on to the consumer. And the point that I'm doing all of this for is to show that they want to pass all of this on to the consumer while they are still unbelievably profitable. And that they pay their CEOs unbelievable salaries, and yet pay the working class person nothing. Absolutely nothing. And this is what I'm on my soapbox about. Okay, as we get deeper into it and the reality of what the working class is actually paying and how they're trying to get through all this, and what the money grab has been for all of the corporations across the board. This one is particularly looking at the food industry. And if you watch television tonight or the news tonight or yesterday, whenever this finally gets onto Facebook, because it takes forever for me to post for things to queue and upload to Facebook. So whenever you finally see this in the last 2 days, They've been talking about the price gouge and the money grab in the food industry. And that's very real. And I've been studying all this now for the last 3 or 4 months. And it's not just the food industry. I want to keep in mind, I did a post about the automobile industry, but I will prove, and I'm showing you that this has occurred in every industry since the pandemic, all industries in America. And this is what's egregious. And this was the money grab. This is why it's a cosign from the politicians and why they're very well aware that it was going on and they wanted it to happen. The other reason why I say that, and I'll just let the cat out of the bag, or if you study economics and you study our economy, when we borrow money from when we borrow money from the feds, our income tax originally was designed to pay what we borrow back to the feds. But because we borrowed so much money, our income taxes don't raise enough money to pay back the feds. The other way that states, local, federal, and municipal governments, the other way that they bring in revenue is not just through your income tax and state tax. They bring in revenue from taxing all of the commodities and the taxes on doing business. And I put it to you like this. At one point, they taxed 3% on $5. But because there's so much debt and they borrowed so much money, now they can't raise enough money in revenue, in tax revenue, based on prices of goods and commodities and services being $5. So they have to, so all of the prices of goods, services, and commodities have to raise their prices to $10 so that they can charge 3% of $10, which is a greater number to go towards the tax revenue than 3% of $5. Now that's the main reason why your politicians are co-signing for this. And the trick and the problem, and when you get into the different parties and what the Republicans believe versus what the Democrats believe, this is the issue and the problem. The problem is, and why we have higher prices and prices don't go down, and why this is poor management and poor leadership out of our Republican and Democratic leaders, is because when they raise the revenue after raising the prices and they get the money, now they say, okay, we've made this much money by raising taxes. We're not going to lower the prices of goods and commodities and everything else for the working class and the rest of American society. We're going to keep it at this so that we can create a new budget. And this new budget can now pay for all of the money that goes to Israel, the money that goes to Ukraine, the social programs that we have, and all of the sorts, right? That's the issue that's where you get into, this is a concerted effort by the politicians to allow the prices of goods, commodities, and services inflate to where they are, because they benefit from that as well. When you're running a government and your entire budget is based on the taxes raised on the price of commodities and goods and services and income taxes. That's their incentive. That's their motive and reason for enabling this, co-signing for this, and allowing this to happen. And that's exactly what happened. There are many, many states right now, Indiana, Wisconsin, Texas, that are actually at budget surpluses. And the reason why they're at budget surpluses has nothing to do with the amount of working people in the state contributing to the income tax state coffer. It has everything to do with the fact that, because right now unemployment just rose to 4.3%. And since the pandemic and everything else, unemployment has been high, trying to climb down, but it has never gotten back to the point where it was when Barack Obama was president, or at the beginning of the term of Donald Trump. Okay. So unemployment has never gotten back under 4% and 3%, which is where it was during 2% under Barack Obama, 2.5%, 3% under Donald Trump, and then skyrocketed to, I think, almost 10% through the pandemic. So the money, the government's getting money is not based on people contributing through income tax. The money that these surpluses that all these states and the government is getting is because of the price of commodities, goods, and services that have risen so high and have been taxed, and money has been earned on the taxation of goods, commodities, and services. That's how Indiana, Wisconsin, Texas, and other states have these huge budget surpluses. It's because the prices of goods have been inflated so high so that they could make up their budget shortfalls. And that's just facts. That's facts. Let me get into the deeper. Again, this soapbox has to do with the food industry. The food industries that I looked at I looked at several. The ones we're going to talk about right here are General Mills, Post, Kellogg, which is cereal, Coca-Cola, Soda Pop, Tyson Food, which is chicken, and Heinz Kraft Kraft Heinz, Oscar Myers, okay? So we're gonna look at those and their budget and their profits, what they pay their CEOs, what they pay their senior management, and what they pay their hourly worker. Before I also get into that, before I get into those full details, we're gonna talk about what the average cost is to be a single person and rent a place and operate the single person 1-bedroom home in America, what that cost is, hourly wage, weekly wage, national rental, the national rental average, and then averages by select 5 cities in the country, what their averages are for the average of the rent price. Then, you know, what a monthly budget is for a single person in a 1-bedroom apartment, what that monthly budget is based on the averages and everything else. And we'll go over that right now. And then I'll go deeper into what the actual profits are, what the CEOs make, what senior management makes, and what hourly wages make. Okay. Now, two more things before we get into all that. Number one, keep this as the premise of everything when you start hearing these numbers, and not just the expense numbers, because I'm giving you expenses and I'm giving you revenue and then net profit, right, for an individual person who earns hourly wages. Okay. And then what the profits are from the companies that they work for and everything else. Keep this in mind. $100 million pays 11,000 employees $90,000 each. I'll say that again. $100 million will pay 11,000 employees a salary of $90,000 each. Remember that. Just remember that number. $100 million will pay 11,000 employees $90,000 each. Okay. Please keep that in mind as we go through all these numbers. I said that in the automobile industry post. I'll say that for every post that we do and every sector that I have divided up and present to you all. Just keep that in mind. Now let's go deeper into this. Again, before I get into the food industry and what their actual profits are, their CEOs make, their senior management makes an hourly wage, let's talk about this. This is just basic American math and everything else, right? Hourly wage times 40 hours a week equals your weekly pay. Your weekly pay times 52 weeks equals your gross yearly pay. I say gross because that does not include the fact that you have to pay taxes. So that's the income tax that you will be paying for your labor. Okay, so you're paying taxes for the fact that you're working. That's whatever. All right, now just keep that in mind. That's where these numbers are coming from. That's where the formulas are coming from. That's where everything else. Now, the national rental average is $1,536 for a 1-bedroom apartment. A single person has to pay for a 1-bedroom apartment $1,536. Those numbers fluctuate based on the region that you're in, and the national average is obviously all these regions. You take the highest and the lowest and all those up, you add them up and divide it by the number, and that gives you an average, right? So in Chicagoland, the real average of a rental is $1,843. In New York City, 1-bedroom, single individual 1-bedroom, that's what it costs in Chicago. In New York, $3,812. LA, $2,123. Dallas, $1,400. Atlanta, $1,600. Okay, you multiply that number times 12 because you have the roof over your head for a year. So it's that times 12. That's one whole year, and just to put a roof over your head is $18,432 on a national average of $1,536. Keep that in mind. Okay, so $18,000 just to put a 1-bedroom apartment roof over your head in the United States of America. You have to make at least, just to put a roof over your head, $18,000. That's a roof over your head. That doesn't mean you have electricity or anything else. That's just the roof over your head, period. $18,000. Now, when you get into the expenses that one has to put a single person to put a 1-bedroom apartment over their head, you have your average rent. These are the basic expenses. These are basic bare minimum expenses, and I'm giving you a total for that. That is the rent, which is $1,539. You have the car insurance, which is $194 a month. You have the average car payment, which inflated prices and everything else, the average car payment is anywhere between $500 and $700 a month. Okay? Inflated car prices. Artificially determined inflated car prices, especially after the pandemic. That's what I talked about yesterday in the automobile industry, and that's what and today I'm doing the food industry. But nonetheless, car payment $735, electric bill $151, residential gas bill $63, your internet bill $89, your water bill $39, your garbage bill $25, your food bill anywhere between $300 and $450 a month. And then and then you have your vehicle transportation costs, which is the gasoline per month that you put into your vehicle. And that can be anywhere between $200 to $400 based on how far you drive to get to work. Okay. So just your expenses alone, a person for a 1-bedroom apartment expenses alone needs $3,266.75 just to meet their monthly bills. Okay? Just to have the roof over their head and food in their mouth. There's nothing lavished outside of it. That's not even a cell phone. That's no streaming services. That's not a haircut. That's not buying clothes. That's not taking care of any emergency maintenances on your vehicle. None of that at all. That's just your electric, water, gas. That's just to be able to take a shower and go to work and feed yourself. Okay? $3,266 a month. That's a total of $39,000 a year just to exist in America. Just to exist in America, you need $39,000 a year as a single individual in a 1-bedroom apartment to exist in America. So if you want to have your own apartment and live on your own and provide for yourself and everything else, just the bare minimum, you do that, you need a job that pays $39,201 just for that. No other expense. No haircut, no streaming services, no cell phone, because the cell phone is not included in this. Okay? None of that. None of that. Okay? That's what it requires. $39,201 just to have a 1-bedroom apartment over an individual's head. Period. Monthly expenses times 12, that's the total. Okay. Keep that in mind. Like I said, hourly wage times 40-hour week, the week times 52 a year, that's your gross pay. Not minus in taxes. You have to subtract taxes from that. So whatever this gross yearly pay is, has to be higher than the $39,201 if you're going to survive. Otherwise, you're selling your ass, you're being a hooker, you're being a prostitute, you're selling any and every freaking thing you can to try and make up the difference and to at least get to $39,201. That's what a single person entry level in America needs in order to have a roof over their head as an individual. Otherwise, you better be living with somebody else, living under your parents' roof, or doing something else. I don't know, having a fake partner, a lover, be gay, be straight, whatever. You need a partner if you don't make, at a bare minimum, $40,000 a year. I just added $800 to that, padded it with $800. You need $40,000 after tax in order to exist in this country. Okay? Keep that in mind. Remember, $100 million will pay 11,000 employees $90,000 a year. Okay? Now, that's the setup. That's basically the setup. Okay? Now let's talk about the actual profits of these corporations, what they pay their CEOs, what they pay their senior management, and what they pay the working class, you and I. Before I also get into that, I do want to add this little fucking comment in here. There is not one food company, car company, or anything else that a CEO deserves the salaries that they get. Because they didn't bring, the only person in my mind, other than the apps that exist and and computer programming, which I don't know that industry very well and I don't study it and I can't really talk about that. But when it comes to technology and everything else, no new product has come to market. The only person who deserves the money that they got, the stock options that they got, the salaries that they received was Steve Jobs when he brought the iPod, the iPhone, and the Apple Watch to market. That is an example of capitalism where you are being rewarded for your contribution. But all of these CEOs, whether it's the car company, the airline company, the banks, the food companies, the grocery store companies, all of these industries that I will talk about in every post that you will see coming up, all of these CEOs were handed a corporation. They didn't have to build the company. They didn't have to create management. They didn't have to create a structure or a system to put in place for operations. They were handed an already existed corporation and company and functioning corporation and functioning manufacturing. They were already handed it. All they had to do was steer the ship. There's no reason to justify their salaries the way they are without rewarding the everyday worker who maintains the actual existence of the ship. There's no reason for it because none of these CEOs adding a new ingredient, adding more sugar to a product and cereal is not bringing a new product to market. Changing an ingredient in Tylenol is not bringing a new product to market. That's bullshit. That's absolute bullshit. Okay? No new products to market by any of these corporations. Changing the Bluetooth in your freaking cars is not bringing a new product to market for GM, Chrysler, or Ford. That's not bringing. All they're doing is steering the ship. There's no justification for those salaries, those wages. None. The people who deserve, at this point when it comes to corporations, the people who deserve a standard living wage with disposable income are the everyday workers, in my opinion. Period. End of story, full stop. So let's get into this, okay? General Mills in 2023 made $2,794,000. Excuse me, my numbers are wrong, and I'm just a dumb nigger, so please forgive me. $2,794,000,000. $2,794,000,000 gross profits for General Mills in 2023. In 2022, $2,707,000,000. In 2021, now I'm going to call the pandemic 2019, 2020, and 2021. $2,340,000,000. In 2020, $2,181,000,000. In 2019, the beginning of the pandemic, the very beginning of the pandemic, $1,753,000,000. Whoa, that's a big jump. That's $500 million jump from the beginning of the pandemic to the middle of the pandemic. And then an additional 200, so that's a $750 million jump from the beginning of the pandemic to the end of the pandemic. And then after the end of the pandemic, coming into 2022, it's a whole $1 billion difference from the beginning of the pandemic to the end of the pandemic. That's just the numbers, okay? 2019, $1.753 billion. In 2018, $2,131,000,000. In 2017, $1,650,000,000. In 2015, 16, $1,697,000. 2015, $1,222,000,000. Now, in 2015, all the way up to 2018, you had a steady, slow, natural progression. There was a jump from 2015 to 2016. Guess what? That's when Donald Trump came in and they reduced taxes for the rich and everything else. And you got a $500 million jump from 2015 to 2016. And then from 2016, 17, and 18, a consistent price increase, a consistent growth in profit of roughly $100 to $200 million year over year. But once you get into the pandemic, it actually doubles. And it goes from 1.6 to 2.1. So that's over $500 million. So the prices then in the pandemic were automatically set high in the pandemic, and they've been high ever since. And it was so high that it didn't just give them an extra $500 million. It actually gave them over $1 billion more through the pandemic and coming out of the pandemic, $1 billion more than what they started before the pandemic. And these are the numbers that I'm challenging and saying, this is the price gouge. This is the artificial pricing that occurred. This is where the corporations, the CEOs, your representatives, and everybody else co-signed for you and I, the working class people, to bear the brunt of this egregious pricing. It's not capitalism and it's not free market, because capitalism, free market says that the people who have the money, not the people who make the prices, that the people, based on what the people have as far as money, sets the price in which something will be sold at. Not the other way around, that someone determines we're going to artificially just make this price and make everybody pay that price until they can't pay it anymore. That's not capitalism and that's not free market at all. So the CEO of General Mills is a guy by the name of Jeff Harms. The CEO pays himself a salary of $16.4 million. Okay. The senior workers make $150,000 to $178,000. And the hourly worker makes $12 to $19 an hour. That means at General Mills, the customer service reps, the people who are packing the food, the people who are putting the food in the bags, the people who are quality inspecting, only make $12 to $19 an hour. That's a total, yearly total, before taxes, a yearly total of $24,000 to $39,000 a year at $12 to $19 per hour. As I said earlier, the expenses for a single person to have a one-bedroom house and put over the roof over their head, the bare minimum is $39,201 in order to exist with a roof over your head and operate your home. And at the maximum of what General Mills pays, their maximum payment for their lower-end warehouse workers, entry-level people, is $39,520. They cannot survive. They can't survive. A single individual working at General Mills who makes the top dollar at $19 an hour cannot survive. They can't put a roof over their head. There's a General Mills plant right near my house in Rockford. I can tell you right now, that's about what they're making. They cannot even get an apartment in Rockford on their own because they don't make enough money. And yet you fucking Republicans and you fucking bastards who think just because you make $150,000 to $175,000 that these people do not deserve a living wage. And you think you're going to side with the fucking Republicans who want to cut more taxes for the corporation that makes $2.7 billion, practically $2.8 billion in 2023, and pays their CEO $16.4 million. $100 million pays 11,000 employees $90,000 a year. You're telling me in 2023, when you got 2,794,000,000, that 100 million, which would make that $2.6 billion, they can't take $100 million and pay 11,000 employees $90,000 a year? Make it make sense. I know I'm dumb nigga. I know I'm just a dumb nigga, right? But these numbers don't make sense. It's not justifiable. Whether you make $150,000 a year, whether you make $16 million a year, whether you're a corporation that makes $2 billion a year, or you're an employee that only gets your glass ceiling is $19 an hour. $39,000 a year. Make that make fucking sense. And yet your politicians want to dance around and pretend like, oh, no, you co-signed for it. And the reason why I say you co-signed for it is because they made these kind of profits. Imagine the tax revenue based on the higher amount of money that they receive because cereal costs more. And the corporation has more more profit, so now they can tax that at a higher percentage. This was a co-sign by your Democratic and Republican leaders. Post. Are we getting the picture here? I'm going to do all of them. I want you to understand that this is a consistent trend through all the food industries, like it was with the automobile industry. And as you will see on the other sectors that I've divided out, it's the same across the board. And this is sad. Post. I'm not going to read off the year anymore. I'm just going to go down the list and the numbers, speed this up. And then we get to the CEO and you can see the trends, right? I'm doing this and I'm reading these numbers out because I want you to see the trend. We're calling the pandemic years 2019 to 2021. I'm starting with year 2023 on all of these companies that I'm evaluating. Post, 300 million, 2023. 2022, 757 million. 2021, 100, look at that jump. 2021, $167 million, and then it jumps in 2022, coming out of the pandemic, 757 million. Over $500 million. Again, they set a price point that high. It was never based on supply chain. It was never based on supply and demand. It was an artificial set, a price gouge, and they held the American public over ransom. They artificially forced the inflation. They artificially enforced all of this that we have endured as struggling working class people. The interesting thing, in 2020, they only made $1 million. So that's the middle of the pandemic. Yeah, that makes sense. People weren't buying. There's a small trend where people weren't buying. And, Post makes a lot of sugary cereals. And when you are working and you have to make a decision on cereals and everything else, you're going to try and go for the cheapest, less sugarious, easiest route. It makes sense. But in 2019, when the pandemic starts, 122 million. In 2018, 457 million. Okay. Their CEO, Nick Cottagio, he pays himself $17.4 million. So $1 million more than General Mills. They make less money than General Mills as a profit margin and everything else, but he pays himself $17 million. 17.4. The hourly person who works at Post makes anywhere between $12 an hour to $25 an hour. The senior management makes $140,000 a year to $190,000 a year. The hourly worker is either going to make $24,000 a year and they're going to tap out at $25 an hour. They're going to tap out at $52,000 a year. Now, you might say $52,000 a year, but let's remember that's before taxes. And in order for a single individual, now keep this in mind, in order for a single individual to put a roof over his head with a one-bedroom apartment and operate that house, no extra expense, no haircuts, no cell phone, no fixing your car if something goes wrong or anything else. The $40,000 is just to own and have a roof over your head so that you can go to and from work, take a shower and feed yourself. Okay? So $52,000 before taxes, $40,000 for a yearly expense, $39,201, rounded up to $40,000 for a yearly expense. Just that leaves less than $1,000 a month for any extracurricular activity. Go to a movie, fix the broken car, anything, any cell phone, streaming services, any other expenses that you want to add into the budget that only allows less than $1,000 a month at $25 an hour. Less than $1,000. You're not saving for a house. You're not saving for any extracurricular activity or anything like that. You are strapped. No absorption if these companies do pass on this new cost and inflation goes up again. There's no absorption for that, even at $52,000 a year before taxes. Kellogg, 900, and remember, $100 million pays 11,000 employees $90,000 a year. And these are their profits. Kellogg, 2023, 951 million. 2022, 960 million. 2021, middle of the pandemic coming out, $1.4 billion. Middle of the pandemic, $1.2 billion. Beginning of the pandemic, $960 million. In 2018, $1.3 billion. 2017, $1.2 billion. Get the picture here, what's going on? You could say, oh, well, Sean and Kellogg in 2022, 2023, they took less money. They didn't make $1 billion. Yeah, that's kind of true. But through the pandemic and everything else, they price gouged and they were making well over $1 billion. And I would argue the drops that you see in Post and Kellogg and some of these other ones is when the consumer, which they reported in these articles and everything, even on the news with Wolf Blitzer and all these other people who are so fucking brilliant, consumers are no longer buying products or buying these products, and companies, I mean, this is what's reported in the articles, and companies are now getting concerned because people aren't buying their products, and they certainly can't now raise the price of their products because the cost of their operating costs and productions have gone up, and they need to pass that cost on to the consumer. That's the conundrum now. But people aren't going to buy their stuff, and if they certainly raise their prices, people definitely aren't. But that's because all of this was artificially set, and the people can't afford it. And they're turning stuff, they're not turning to that shit anymore. Coca-Cola. Oh wait, so Steve Callahan paid himself, CEO, paid himself $17 million. The average hourly worker at Kellogg makes anywhere between $16 an hour to $28 an hour. The senior management makes $160,000 a year to $216,000 a year. That means that the hourly worker makes anywhere between $33,000 a year to $58,000 a year. I just showed you the numbers again. It basically cost $40,000 for a single individual to get a one-bedroom apartment and put it on his head, turn on the lights, shower, shit, and feed themselves. Bare minimum $40,000 just for that. There's no extracurricular activity in that. Well, at Kellogg, the lowest paid person only makes $33,000. That means they're $7,000 short than the bare minimum to get an apartment on their own. And if they are the most senior management on a warehouse, these senior managers, this top pay is your shift leader, your warehouse foreman, your managers, your IT people. That's who's making the $28 an hour, and they're only making $58,000 a year before taxes. After taxes, they're probably right at 49 to 50. And remember, it's $40,000 just to put a roof over your head, which means those people at the highest end at Kellogg only have $8,000 over the entire year of extra money. So that's the $8,000 to get a streaming service, to get a cell phone, to maintenance your vehicle because your vehicle needs to be maintenance, to buy cat food or get a pet or anything like that. You only have $8,000 left over if you work at Kellogg and you're most senior paid person in a warehouse at $28 an hour, making only $52,000 a year. Reality. These are facts. These are numbers. At the end of this, I will show you the quarterly and yearly reports put out by their own company and their job hire solicitations on Indeed and everything else that list these prices of what they get paid. That's where this is coming from. This is the research that I have done. Okay? This is the reality. And yet you motherfucking assholes in the Republican Party think that these corporate people deserve a tax break and these senior CEOs deserve a tax break. And no, God forbid that you give these working class people the dignity, the fucking dignity to put a roof over their head and have a little chump change to get a fucking haircut. Really? Make this make sense. The egregious thing is the price gouge that occurred and the lie of the inflation that occurred across the entire industry, where this was a money grab and a false inflation, artificial inflation that you and I, the working class people, had to endure, suffer, and agonize over. Coca-Cola, 2023, $10 billion. 2022, $9.5 billion. Let me make that clear. 2023, $10.7 billion. 2022, $9.5 billion. 2021, $9.7 billion. Oh, look at this $2 billion jump. 2020, $7.7 billion. So from 2020 to 2021, when the prices jumped, it went $2 billion more. From $7 billion in 2021 to 2020 to 2021 to $9 billion. They made $2 billion off their price gouge. 2019, $8 billion. 2018, $6 billion. 2017, and I got the reason for this happened in 2017, $1 billion. 2016, $6 billion. 2015, $7 billion. The reason why in 2017 it went down to $1 billion is in 2017 is when many governments were going to add a sugar tax to sugary drinks and soda pops. In 2017, Coca-Cola made the switch of those mini cans, where they made all of the mini cans the price of a regular 12-ounce can, and then they raised the price of all the 12-ounce cans. That shocked the American consumer, and they stopped buying, and it was an adjustment. But that when they had to change all of their company productions, they had to change that 12-ounce can and add the new 8-ounce mini cans. And that's why they had a lot of external expenses in productions, because they had to retool all of their equipment. That's why they only made $1 billion in 2017. Only $1 billion. Look, Coca-Cola can take $100 million, pay 11,000 employees $90,000 a year, and still never come close to breaking under $1 billion a year profit. And yet, okay, so James Quincy is the CEO of Coca-Cola. He pays himself $25 million. The average hourly worker makes $19 to $25 an hour at Coca-Cola, and the average senior member makes anywhere between $96,000 to $138,000. Okay, that means that the hourly worker only makes $41,000 to $52,000 a year, and the average cost to have a one-bedroom apartment and operate your one-bedroom apartment in America is $40,000 a year. Tyson Foods. This is where I was talking about single inflation versus inflation rate, and with Tyson Foods. So in 2023, Tyson Food, and I want to talk about this negative as well. In 2023, Tyson had a negative profit of $648 million. Now, like I told you, we had bird flu, and Tyson had to eliminate all of their product, that being chickens. They had to kill them, burn them, get rid of them, because they had bird flu and they were infecting our food supply. So they had to get rid of the majority of their product, and that's their net loss. But prior to that, in 2022, they made $3 billion. 2021, coming out of the pandemic, they made $3 billion. Now, in 2020, middle of the pandemic, $2 billion. At the beginning of the pandemic, $1 billion. In 2018, $1 billion. 2017, $1 billion. 2016, $1 billion. 2015, $1 billion. Now, any corporation that has a negative year, negative profit, they are allowed for 3 years to not have to pay taxes. And for those subsequent 3 years, they also get a tax return based on the taxes that they paid in the previous year. So there's no reason, A, for ever a bailout, but B, there's really no reason to ever be worried about a single year being in a negative production, a negative profits, because no profits means that you don't have to pay taxes for 3 years, and you get a tax return from the federal government, IRS. You get a tax return in the amount of the previous year of tax that you paid. So if you're Tyson and you paid $800 million in 2022, and now in 2023 you're negative, and the next year, 2020, 23, 24, 25, you'll get $800 million, and you won't have to pay any taxes for those 3 years. That's how corporate works. The corporate taxes work. The CEO of Tyson Foods is a guy by the name of Donnie King. He pays himself $13 million a year, and the average worker at Tyson Foods makes $13 an hour to $29 an hour, and the senior management makes $150,000 to $201,000 a year. Tyson Foods. Again, paying attention to the pandemic and the money grab, the price gouge and the money grab. They literally went from $1 billion to $3 billion from the beginning of the pandemic to the end of the pandemic and subsequent years after the pandemic. They made $3 billion when they started before the pandemic, and at the pandemic, they were at $1 billion. So they doubled, tripled their billions by raising the price. I don't understand that if you have to raise price, inflation has to occur because price of gasoline went up, supply chain is down, and everything else, how you could make double and triple profits. Your price ought to be set so that you can get over that hump and still be profitable, which means your profits would still look like they were in 2015, 2016, 2017, and 2018, not tripling what they were from 2016, 2017, 2018, and 2019. All across the board, every 90% of all corporate industries had this type of tripling through the pandemic. That's why this is a price gouge. That is why it's co-signed by the elected representatives. And like I said, the incentive for the elected representatives to co-sign and allow this to happen is because it brings tax revenue back into the coffers so that these states and federal governments can pay back some of what the money they borrowed. Oscar Mayer Kraft Heinz, $2.8 billion 2023. 2022, $2.3 billion. 2021, at the end of the pandemic, $1 billion. Middle of the pandemic, $350 million. Beginning of the pandemic, $1.9 billion. So, again, going back all the way to 2015 and everything else, they were at $3 billion. So, they gouged their prices. People are not buying condiments, Oscar Mayer, and everything else. And as you'll see in these things, I'll show you the prices of what bacon used to be, or what bacon is now versus what it was prior to the pandemic. Most of these companies are not, all of these companies are not selling more units to get to these prices. They're not selling more units. They sold more units in 2015, 2016, 2017 to get to those profits. The units that are being sold today are not as numerous as they were prior to the pandemic. The reason why they're making these profits is they have raised the price so high, and they don't even have to sell as many units to make that, to double their profits. Okay? This is consistent, and this is consistent with Butterball. This is consistent with Pepsi. This is consistent with Frito-Lay's. This is consistent across the board. I've looked at the numbers. This has occurred everywhere. Whether it's the gas industry, gasoline industry, whether it's the automobile industry, which was the post I just previously did, whether it's the food industry, whether it's the supermarket, the national grocery store chains, the Walmarts, the Targets, the Albertsons, the Krogers, they also do the exact same thing. And they see the exact same results in their profits. And they pay their CEOs the same, and they pay their hourly workers the same. All the banks, it's the same. This was a money grab. The inflation never needed to happen. Okay? Let me get into that. I'll start to wind this up, and at the end of this, I'll show you the source of material that I got this from, which is the statistical analysis that were posted by their own quarterly reports and yearly reports. I'll show you I literally went to grocery stores and took pictures of the prices of foods and the convenience stores and everything else, took pictures of the price tags of foods. Kamala Harris and the Republicans, nobody's going to sit up here and try and tell me that inflation doesn't exist, the prices have gone down, and that nobody's going to tell me that. You cannot prove that otherwise, because I have the proof, the facts on my side as to what it is. Everything you buy at a store is starting at basically round up $5. So for every item that you have, you're spending $5 for every item that you put in your cart. It's practically, or just about $5 at a minimum, just to put something in your cart. It's absurd. Now, let me talk about supply and demand, why this inflation is a ruse, why this is a money grab, and why your Republican and Democratic leaders signed off on this, what this is, what I think the solution to the problem is, and then wrap this up, right? I know this is lengthy. I've been trying to shorten this down, but I want to get this out there. And like I said, I've done this for every industry, so stay tuned, because part 3 will be another one. And I'll go through it all. I mean, it may be redundant and mundane, but this is the proof that it's not just the food industry, which is all they're talking about on the news today. It's the automobile industry. I already did that post. It's every fucking industry where they raped, pillaged, and stole from the American people when it never needed to happen. Now, The excuse for the pricing was the supply chain and supply. Basic economic capitalist free market principles say that if you have a whole lot of things, if I have a whole bunch of these, then they're not very valuable. They're only worth $1. But if I only have 2 and everybody needs them, so the supply is diminished and the demand is very high, it's no longer $2 or $1. I can now say it is, well, that's the question. Who sets that price, right? But the point I'm making is, it's no longer $1 because I only have 2 of them. It's now $7. And the idea is that if you make it $7, then the people who can't afford that the demand is down now because not too many people have the $7 to buy it. And now you slowly build up the supply again. Okay, that's basic supply and demand. When supply is up, the demand is low because there's so much of it, it doesn't cost very much. When supply is down, the demand is high, and now the prices are up very high because so many people want something that is not really readily available. Okay. Free market says that the majority of people who can afford to pay, the price is set based on what they can pay. Okay. And that's the free market says we can only afford so much, so that's what the price will be set at, so that it's affordable and that the demand and the supply is equaled out. Okay. What has occurred, why this is a ruse, and why this is all an assertive effort by corporations, CEOs, and your elected officials is they blame the supply chain and they blame supply after the pandemic. As you can see in the numbers, there was no issue with that. And they set the price at a point that wasn't close to before the pandemic because they wouldn't have made double and triple profits if they did set a price just to get through the pandemic. The demand wasn't so high that you needed to make the price down. What they did is they deliberately tamped down the supply chain, creating an artificial demand because they could have made the supply, but they chose not to. So they maintained the demand price, pretending like the supply wasn't available, and maintained that price for so long until they forced the people to, which is happening now, to not want it anymore. Okay? But the problem is the greed of all of these CEOs, the entire assertive effort of the corporation and your elected representatives was such that it hit across the board and the price of everything went up. So even at that point, everyone's paying more money for everything. The inflation rate skyrocketed and nobody could afford anything. All this was artificial. It did not need to happen this way. It was done deliberately. Even now, your grocery stores aren't full. Their shelves aren't full and everything else because they are still forcing a false demand by not giving the supply, by not supplying what is needed. So they're artificially tamping down supply to maintain demand so they can try and justify the pricing that they're making. That's what's happened. It's not a lie. I'm not trying to trick you. I'm not trying to mislead you. I'm not trying to anything else. This is what they did. This is what they're still doing. That's how they're making these insane double profits. But it's artificial. If any Republican or Democrat was in office and they truly wanted they truly cared about the American people and they weren't in the hands of the corporations and they weren't greedy to try and fill their own coffers and make up their own budget deficits for borrowing too much goddamn money, any person who was for the working class and the American society and for prosperity for Americans, the moment the pandemic happened and we started opening up, they would have artificially subsidized corporations to go into overproduction. Overproduce beef, overproduce cereal, overproduce cars, overproduce everything. They would have gone to the Fed to subsidize. That would have caused some inflation, yes, to subsidize the overproduction. Overproduction would have kept the prices down. People would have gone back to work, had disposable income. They would have started buying it, and the government could have slowly taken away the subsidy, and the true, fair, capitalistic free market system would have then evaluated, and the price would have up and down until it stabilized. That is how we would have gotten out of this pandemic, where the people were not price gouged, cheated, and corporations walked away with billions of dollars, and the CEOs walked away with billions of dollars. And as I pointed out, in the automobile industry and this industry and every other industry out there, the hourly worker can't even afford to live in a single one-bedroom home at $40,000 a year. Make this make sense, and how you fucking Republicans can justify giving tax breaks to the corporations and giving tax breaks to the CEOs. How the fuck do you honestly look your constituents in the eye and feed them that bullshit? And how are you, an hourly worker, believing and supporting the Republicans are trying to make your life better? Or how are you even going to support the Democrats who want to borrow more money? And the more we keep borrowing money from the feds to give to fucking Israel, to give to Ukraine and everything else, the more we keep borrowing for all this social services and infrastructure plan, the more we keep borrowing that money, the more the inflated prices are going to be, because income taxes doesn't just pay back what we borrow. They have to use the prices of goods and services and commodities. They have to rise so they can get more revenue, tax revenue, off of what those prices are. That's why I do not support Republicans or Democrats. That is why this entire inflation is a ruse and an assertive effort by your Democratic and Republican leaders to allow this to happen and do it on your back. And egregiously and grossly off the back of working class people. This is what's going on. I am not misleading you. I'm not trying to cheat you. I'm not trying to lie to you. I'm not trying to hoodwink you or anything like that. I'm just presenting you with the numbers and challenging you to evaluate and critically think as to what is the information out there, what is going on. I've showed you the numbers year over year from 2015 to 2023 and what the profits have doubled, tripled, and skyrocketed. If inflation was such just to compensate, they passed the price on just to. I don't agree with that. I have arguments about that. But even if it was just enough to, compensate for the rise in gas prices and the rise in wage, then you would not see double and triple profits in these industries. You would see maybe $1.7 billion, you might see that move to $1.85 billion. So another $150 million increase, if anything, based on a slight rise to compensate for wages and everything else. But if you really are just doing it dollar for dollar, then you would see the exact same amount for the exact same year, for the exact same amount of units sold in both years. The amount would be the exact same. I mean, that's the real number. That's the real true number. You only rose the price to make sure that you made the exact same amount, and the only way you made more than $1.7 billion is you sold more units. That's the real, you only used inflation to pass the costs on. And it's just the cost that you passed on. You didn't money grab, price gouge, or do anything else. That's the truth. I mean, that's the real truth. Okay. So I'll get back to, so that's the issue with the supply demand and the falsity of inflation across every industry. Okay. So having said that, I'm starting to wrap this up. And then at the end of my rant and rave and everything else, you will see the pictures of my primary sources and the pictures of the prices of foods and everything else. I've gone around in grocery stores, took pictures of the price labels, and gone around, took pictures of the price labels and investigated and everything else. And then I researched and got the quarterly reports and yearly reports and the statistical macro trends of each year for all of these companies. And then I went on Indeed and got their pay scales and looked up the CEOs and what they were paid and everything else. I don't want to mislead you. Most of those CEO salaries, footnote, most of those CEO salaries are only salaries of like $1.8 million. And then the difference of like $10 to $12 million that they're getting is based on bonuses and stock options. Okay. So that's also how they're making that money. That is a footnote. But nonetheless, every employee doesn't have a stock option. and every employee isn't able to supplement bonus and stock options to supplement their income. And as you can see with the hourly wages, they do not make enough money to put a roof over their head. Period, point blank, end of story, bottom line. $15 an hour is still not a minimum wage. The Democrats and all these people want to fight for that and everything else, but when you look at the numbers, that's not a minimum wage. That's what I'm on my soapbox about, and that's what I'm pointing out to you. All of you people who want to bitch and complain about the fact that people want $15 an hour, $15 an hour still isn't enough. That's why I throw out the number. $100 million gives every employee, 11,000 employees, $90,000 a year. And as far as I'm concerned, the entry-level job, and I believe I said this in the very beginning, the entry-level job ought to be anywhere starting at $80,000 to $100,000 a year. Entry-level, period. That is enough disposable income for Americans to be prosperous, buy homes, live a comfortable, people who are making that much money can live a comfortable life, buy a home and everything else, and they still aren't living and having extravagance like CEOs and corporate leaders and senior management. It's just enough to put a roof over your head and take yourself to the movies or go on a trip. Is that really so much for a human being in the United States to ask for? At this point, I'm going to break down these two. Okay, so my position and how to correct the problem. First of all, I believe in taxing the fuck out of these corporations, these CEOs, and people who make over $1 million a year. Tax the fuck out of them. If these people at capital gains inherit, tax the fuck out of that shit. Because if these people can't give dignity to the working class hourly wage person, then they deserve their taxes to be fucked. Period. You want me to not fuck your taxes? Then you pay people a living wage. And if you're giving people $80,000 to $100,000 a year, and this is the kind of profits and everything else you have, I don't have a problem with that. Because the working class person has a living wage with disposable income and has some dignity for their work and actually can do something like take a vacation or save up to buy a decent home or get married and have children. And provide for their family. If you Republicans want a fucking nuclear family, then you would be touting and proposing that people make entry-level people are making $90,000 to $100,000 a year because then they can support their family on one income and everything else. You fucking hypocritical Republicans. It's bullshit. You're lying. You're lying and you're cheating. You don't believe the bullshit that you feed. I believe tax the fuck out of them. And I'm not saying that because I'm a Democrat. Fuck the Democrats too. They got it fucked up. Both Republicans and Democrats got it fucked up. I'm saying that because I'm for the working class. And these motherfuckers across the board need to be punished. For this bullshit. Call yourself a patriot and a true American and love America. Kiss my ass and suck my dick. Fuck you. Senior management where you want to act like this doesn't affect you because you make $150,000 to $200,000 a year, you're still fucking middle class. And remember, when we're X'd out, they're coming for you, and it'll soon be you. So fuck you for ignoring, and fuck you for not fighting for the working class too. My working class person making $80,000 to $100,000 has no bearing on the fact that you're making $50,000 more than them or even $100,000 more than them. Fuck you. Tax the fuck out of them until they're willing to pay dignity of $80,000 to $100,000. Once you start paying people $80,000 to $100,000 entry level, then you can decrease the taxes on corporations and decrease the taxes on the millionaires. But until then, fucking tax the shit out of them. My position. Solution to the problem, I won't tax. The solution is I won't tax you if working class people are making a working wage with dignity. That being $80,000 to $100,000. And you so-called hypocritical bastard Republicans want to talk about nuclear family values and everything else. Then pay these people enough so that they're making $80,000 to $100,000. They can keep their wife at home and start a fucking family. You fucking faggots. And I don't use that word faggot to be derogatory for sexual preference. I use that to be derogatory in the sense that you're cowardice, spineless, unbelievably disgusting human beings. Inflation rate, this whole time, all of it was a ruse. That's what all of this is about. It's all been a ruse since the pandemic, through the pandemic. It's all been a way for it to be a money grab for corporations and a money grab for states to shore up their coffers and tax revenue. Like I said earlier, this is why it's all a ruse. By allowing the inflation to occur, states were allowed to make money off of the higher prices and state tax revenues, be it sales tax or other ways that they tax to get revenues for their states. Federal government was able to get it. Like I said, perfect example, gasoline, the price of gasoline is set by the crude oil price, the federal tax, and the state tax. That's what sets the price of your gasoline. So when gas prices go up, the state and the Fed makes more money on the price of gas. And it's like that with every commodity, goods, and services in this country. It's why they wanted to tax the internet so bad before, when the internet was not taxed, and now they tax the internet, and your transactions on the internet are taxed. Because the federal government and your state and local governments needed a piece of that money so they can pay back the fucking money that they borrowed and sent to Israel, and pay back the fucking money that they borrowed and sent to Ukraine, and pay back the fucking money that they borrowed to bail out Chrysler and GM, and the fucking money that they bailed out to bail out Evron and all the, and the money that they sent to Iraq and Afghanistan. All this excess money that they spent, both Democrats and Republicans, because let's not get this twisted. Bush and Reagan bailed out the automobile industries. Reagan bailed out Chrysler, Bush bailed out GM and Chrysler, and then Obama extended the bailout and gave them another bailout. All of this borrowed money for all of this other shit is why the prices of things keep going up, and income tax and all this stuff keeps going up. Because they need to find a way to make up that money to pay it back. That's why they co-signed for this. That's how they know, and that's why they wanted this. It's not just and that's why it's so unbelievably hypocritical for Kamala Harris to turn around and be like, I'm going to go after the food company for price gouging. Bitch, you were in on it. And so were the fucking Republicans. Suck my dick. You try to flip the script and pander to the people when you were the ones who helped enable this. It's an indictment of the Democrats and the Republicans, because neither party was working for the people. I told you what would have worked if you were working for the people. You would have went into overproduction the moment you opened the economy back up. Overproduction immediately. Every industry you would have subsidized to go into overproduction. That's not what you did. You went for a free-for-all and allowed them to price gouge and set their own prices. You didn't allow free market principles and capitalism to do. You artificially influenced everything for your own money grabs as Republican and government leaders, and your own money grabs as corporates, and your own money grabs as CEOs. Okay? So the inflation bullshit, I talked about it, it's all bullshit. And borrowing money from the feds, like I said, that's the whole problem as well. We keep borrowing this money, and when we borrow this money, we inflate the prices so that we can raise tax revenue and everything else to try and pay back the money. Now, I believe a solution to the borrowing of issue from the feds, I believe wholeheartedly that any money ever borrowed from the feds, a law ought to be created. Any money ever borrowed from the feds is locked box to only American soil and only American production, meaning infrastructure or anything else. Now, also, I will say, in tax revenue and everything else, if you made all these people the $100 million divided by 11,000 employees, making $90,000 to $100,000 a year, guess what? They're contributing way more to the tax coffers and income tax and everything else. Way more than when they're making only $25,000 to $50,000 a year. They are actually contributing way more. I know when I've been in that tax bracket, I know I've had to pay over $20,000 to $30,000 in taxes, and my only take home was like 60 to 70 when I was making 100, because I had to pay that much in taxes. That much money went to, I worked through the fucking pandemic while a lot of people sat at home, and I still paid taxes. I didn't get a stipend because I made way too much money. That's the bullshit. That's the bullshit, because we can knock out this debt and we can knock out a lot of these problems if you just fucking pay these people. You have the fucking money. You have billions and billions of dollars. You're not saving it for a rainy day. No. So, I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy. but I've already talked about what borrowing money from the Fed is doing, and why your government officials are co-signing for it, and how the corporations are walking away hand in fist with tons of money and their CEOs and everything else, while you, only making $19 to $29 an hour, are struggling and stretching any excess disposable income, stretching that $10,000 over 12 months to try and get by. No way to absorb any vehicle maintenance, no way to get a haircut, no way to get streaming services, no way to go on a vacation, no way to buy a new car. Changing that would change the entire dynamic of our finances in America. That's what I'm on my soapbox about. That's what I tried to point out yesterday with the automobile industry. People are talking about it for the food industry on the news today and in the newspapers today. I've already done this research. The point I'm making is they're only pointing out that it's just the food industry. My point is it's every industry and sector in the entire fucking American economy. And all the research that I did, the only industry that has suffered truly, and there's a whole discussion about that when I get to it, is the airline industry and airline manufacturing companies, Boeing. And that's because the government truly shut that industry down. Restaurant industries as well. The government truly shut those down and everything else. But let's not forget, they were not profitable, so they got tax returns and they don't have to pay taxes for 3 years. Plus, they were also given bailout money to stay afloat and give people money. So, that excuse only goes so far for them to price gouge the way that they've price gouged as well. Every industry across this country has price gouged this. And it was all for a money grab. It was never, ever, ever, ever necessary. That's why I did my research. And it is befuddling to listen to the Democrats and the Republicans argue about this shit when they co-sign for it, and their inconsistencies with the things that they're saying when they co-sign for all this to happen. And what do they truly believe, and do they support what they believe? Both parties are wrong, which is why I am an independent, which is why I want to make both parties pander to me and no longer pander to the corporations. That's what I'm on my soapbox about. The next soapbox, B, this was B or 2, part 3. We are going to look at the grocery store chains, Albertsons, Walmart, Kroger's, Target, Costco, all of the big box grocery store chains and everything else. And again, it's the same story. When you look at what they made year over year through the pandemic, after pandemic, the spike in the profits that they made after the pandemic compared to what they made in 2016, 15, and previous years, it's egregious. And what they pay their CEOs versus what they pay their hourly workers and their senior management people is disgusting. And that's what I'm on my soapbox about, because I truly believe in America, and I truly believe in the working class. I believe in a concept of upward mobility, and I believe in a concept of meritocracy. But the system that is set up now will not and does not and cannot enable it. And I believe this country is about enabling meritocracy and upward mobility, but this is not enabling. I believe to operate and exist in this country, you employ and support people to be upwardly mobile, profitable, prosperous, and live life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. That is a responsibility of every American, every corporation, every existence in this country. That's what I'm on my soapbox about. And that is the hard numbers is what I'm trying to share with you, so that you can start to evaluate critically and not follow these people blindly without holding them to task. And that's what I'm about. So thank you. Have a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful week, evening, day, and please be kind. Thank you.